This episode was originally recorded in summer 2023. You are listening to Pharmacy, IT, and Me, your informatics pharmacist podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pharmacy, IT, and Me. I'm your host, Tony Dow. And on this episode, we have our very special guest, Dr. Jennifer Splawski from Bluesight, that's going to be talking about her career path. And I met Jennifer through ASHP, working on some of the same work groups. So it's really great to have Jennifer on the podcast and kind of get to know you a little bit more now, since we didn't really get to know each other from the work group as much, right? So, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony.
Yeah. Just before we get started, of course, you work at Bluesight, but just for our listeners to kind of get a better understanding of where you came from, can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Jennifer Splawski, one of the directors of clinical strategy here at Bluesight, born and raised in Chicago. So I did my undergrad in psychology and chemistry at the University of Illinois in Champaign, and then transitioned to pharmacy school right afterwards at University of Illinois at Chicago. I did my PGY1 residency out in California, and then moved back to Chicago to start working as a clinical pharmacist in one of the health systems in the Chicagoland area. I transitioned after a few years into emergency medicine and moved to a different health system that had more of a larger patient population, a lot sicker of a patient population, and started ER pharmacy services at that health system. Transitioned into pharmacy management, and then ended up at Bluesight, where I am currently. And somewhere throughout that, I also completed a master's in toxicology as well.
Wow, you had a pretty interesting and very varied career path, actually. The first thing I noticed is that you did your undergrad in psychology. So I guess what made you go from that into pharmacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually in high school, I took a psychology class where we talked a lot about kind of how medications work in various disease states, various psychiatric type disease states. And that was incredibly fascinating to me. I love that class so much, I decided to major in psychology and try to go to pharmacy school. Did the background in chemistry, mostly because of the prerequisites that are required for pharmacy school. So I always thought when I would transition to being a pharmacist, I would actually work in mental health. And here we are today, Tony, talking about informatics. So lots of changes throughout my career.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me too, when I started, I think pharmacy school, before going into pharmacy school, I was thinking I was just going to do retail. And then getting to pharmacy school early on, I was like, I'm going to do a 7-on, 7-off graveyard shift when I graduate. And here I am running this podcast, talking to you about both of our career paths. So it's just there's just so many changes that you kind of don't really know early on sometimes. And so, that's part of why this podcast exists too, is to expose people to the different paths that pharmacy has, which includes pharmacy, informatics, and healthcare IT. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when you kind of moved from working in the traditional pharmacy space, doing a residency and all that, and moving into Bluesight, how did that occur? Was that something you were looking for, or how did that start for you?
Yeah, great question. So most of my work in pharmacy was actually in emergency medicine. That ended up being a definite passion of mine. And then our health system or hospital was undergoing an acquisition. So we're being merged into a much larger IDN. And during this time, I actually had some leadership changes within our department, and I was able to step up and take an interim management position. And one of the fortunate things about being put into a larger IDN is that we suddenly had resources to be able to get our technology up to speed. So during my time as a pharmacy manager, I not only helped manage the staff and help us through the acquisition on the pharmacy side, but also I was on teams and led some teams to build large systems. So things like we transitioned EMR vendors, we transitioned automatic dispensing cabinet vendors, and installed anesthesia workstation. I was our lead in the kit check platform. I also worked with transitioning pump vendors, transitioning defibrillator vendors, and so on and so forth. And throughout this process, I really enjoyed the aspect of not necessarily the background engineering and programming of technology, but how do you effectively implement technology and put it into your workflow? Technology really should make your pharmacy work better. And with some education and with some operational efficiency, hopefully you can integrate new technology platforms to make your hospital and your pharmacy department run better. So after doing this for a few years, I looked for other opportunities to take that skill set and go try something different. I mean, being in hospital pharmacy for a while, it was time for a change and some personal growth. So when I was looking at opportunities, I looked at a lot of the technology vendors that I've worked with previously and tried to figure out where my skills would align with positions that they had available. And ended up taking a job at KitCheck, which is now Blue Site, the medication intelligence company, because I loved the product, but I also really loved the mission and the vision of the company.
So, your experience at working as a interim pharmacy manager, that's really cool because like when you are in that management space, you are involved with all these different technology implementations and you get to see it from an operational standpoint. And then when you move to Blue Side, you get to see it from the vendor standpoint. Like, how did that kind of translate? Like, what were the things that you learned and you experienced during your role working with these technologies from the hospital system side? What were the things that you learned that kind of transition and help you be successful, like in your role today with Blue Site?
Yeah, I think I'd like to split that question up into what internal things that I learned, but what external things that I learn as well. So external is now I'm on the vendor side talking to potential customers. And I look at customers in two different ways. Are they prospective customers? So we're working with them to have them purchase our product, or are they already customers and we're making sure that they're getting the outcomes that they're looking for from the software? And I think that when you're talking to prospective customers, being able to share with them some best practices from your own experience not only helps you sell the product, but it mostly helps you really connect with that person that you're talking to. Like we were in this same shoes before I did this. These are the ways that I added this platform and to create operational efficiencies, understanding a little bit more about your healthcare system. Like this is what you can do based on my experience. And then I think internally it also helped as well. So our company is made up of amazing and brilliant engineers and data analysts and data scientists and project team. And there's a handful of pharmacists. But I think what's important is to be able to communicate to those teams and say, I know this is how we're building things, but what feedback can I give you from more of a customer side? I've used this product before. These are the things that were on my wish list as a customer. And then when we're adding new features, being able to take that information that we gave them, go back to customers and say, hey, based on feedback from our internal pharmacists and our external stakeholders, this is why we want to build these other features. Can you please help us vet them? So I think it definitely helps to do some internal education and then also to make sure that we're truly connecting with the people that are purchasing our products.
Yeah. So, for your role, right? Your role is Director of Clinical Strategy. What exactly is your kind of like responsibilities as that position?
Yeah. So I currently work underneath our commercial umbrella. So my role is acting as a subject matter expert with our sales reps to make sure that they have somebody that is an expert on their side to help demonstrate the software. On the flip side, internally, I do a lot of clinical based marketing projects. So different types of case studies with our customers. I write different papers. I participate in groups such as ASHP, IHFDA, NATI to help network for my own professional growth, as well as to connect customers to other customers. And then I work a lot on internal projects for different types of things that we're looking to build or to move forward on.
So in your role, right? Do you have a lot of customer facing time then? Is that
I
part of it?
do. Yeah.
Okay. So in your role, right, when you get these like requests about certain features that would benefit customers, like how do you bring it up and how do you like kind of triage or, it may be you or maybe someone else. I'm not really sure how the structure works, but how does that come about in terms of like prioritizing what's the next big thing that, Blue Site should focus on?
So that has changed a considerable amount since I've started. So we are always interested in hearing customer feedback about any of our products. And we've created actually a platform called the Blue Site Community for our customers to actually directly reach the product team to put those requests in one of the community channels. And then we have customers voting on which of those features do they like the best. So we really want to make sure that our customer is our number one priority. And then if, let's say there's a feature request that our product team might not be as familiar with, they can have conversations with myself or any of my peers and say, why do you think a pharmacist would want this? How do you think this is going to help operations? And then we're able to provide that feedback from our own experience and from also hearing other voices throughout our time at Blue Site.
Awesome. So it's more like customer driven. I mean, that's really cool. I like the idea of like, having it be voted on. I think a few other companies, it's interesting. A few other companies do that. And then there's also a lot of companies that don't do that. And it's kind of like the visit, like for me, right? Like on the hospital system side, I like to see what the vendor is working on. I like to see what features are going to be next or, voted on to be next. And I think that's a really good visibility kind of thing that Blue Site's doing right now. And the community group is pretty new, right?
Yeah, it's been around, I want to say for a little under a year, but it really launched strongly around ASHP's mid-year meeting last year.
Awesome, awesome. So is that like open just for like the Blue Site customers? Is that how it works?
It's only open to Blue Site customers. We do a considerable amount of either continuing education or different events that are open to anybody interested in our technology, but the community itself is only open to people using our product.
I see, I see. Okay. And then, like in your role as a, customer facing director of clinical strategy, like I guess like what's some of the most rewarding kind of like experiences that you had in doing your role?
Yeah, so with Blue Site, we have three different products. We have an RFID kit and tray checking system, a diversion analytics software, as well as a pharmacy spend optimization tool. So something that when I first started doing demonstrations and talking to live customers is in the diversion space, there's a lot of need for education of how to start a program, how to create a policy, how do you create a standard operating procedure? Do you buy software? What kind of software you buy? And it's still something that is very new, I would say, in pharmacy that people are paying more attention to now. I think that diversion was always something that hospitals had on their mind. So hearing a lot of the feedback from our customers that this was a need, and we were able to develop what we call the Diversion Collective, where we take on things like how do you create a diversion program? How do you structure policy and standard operating procedures around it? How do you educate? How do you benchmark? And also, how do you incorporate that technology? And this is something that I did a lot at my last system, is that we would have technology, but we'd have to integrate an operation. You can't just buy a new piece of technology and expect it to work. You need to make sure that people are educated and that it's integrated into your policies. I think that was one of the most rewarding because I was able to take a lot of our customers together in different cohorts, allow them to communicate with each other, and also allow them to learn about best practices and then for them to contribute to those best practices as well. So I would say creation of that diversion collective was one of the most rewarding things that myself and my team have done at Blue Site.
Yeah, I think that tool was pretty new too, like in the last couple of years and has evolved a lot. I think it was best in class for a while, right?
So we've been best in class for 3 years, and the tool has been around, I believe, for 6 to 7 years now.
So, Diversion Collective is focused on diversion and Blue Site has other tools too. And I guess like for you, like director of clinical strategy, like is that kind of like you overall have to be involved in all of the different products that Blue Site has? Or did you have like a focus on that?
Yeah, so it's for our team, we are familiar with all three of the products, but also what's up and coming within the healthcare landscape. But when it comes to the demonstrations, working with customers, there's different products that I would say maybe we specialize in a little bit more, but we're very familiar and work with customers across all three.
Awesome. Like those three products, RFID, kit check, the med spend, and then also the diversion. When you were going through these, did you kind of like feel like, oh, it's so different now because you're on the other side of things, or you're helping, organizations implement this? Like, was it like, I don't know, like how'd you feel when you kind of moved on to like the other side versus like when you were working at the that hospital level?
I think honestly, it provided me with a lot of personal growth because it was something new, something exciting. I think I'd be remiss to say if I didn't have a little bit of burnout from healthcare in general. So I think being part of a company with such a strong vision for medication intelligence and for what the future of pharmacy should look like was incredibly inspiring to me. So I think for a transition, it was definitely a personal growth transition that I really loved after leaving the healthcare space.
That's awesome. So, when you're in this space now, did you have kind of like any kind of moments of like epiphanies where it made you think about your time as a pharmacy manager and just think about like, oh, if I can't, I knew this.
I think one of the things that I would have done differently is I didn't realize how much support vendors can really provide, and especially of the different technology solutions that I implemented. It would have been nice to hear from a user community or kind of more of a peer to peer reference outside of the sales process. Something that, even for people listening to this podcast to think about is if you want to know how to use your new software platforms, what best practice looks like, talk to your vendors. If they don't know, they have a ton of other customers that they could potentially connect you to. And that's something I wish I would have done, especially in the diversion space. I was on our diversion committee. We had somebody else working with the software solution, but thinking about like, how do you design a committee? Like, we can read about this all day long, but contacting the vendor and saying like, how does everybody else do it? Is there something that we can learn so we don't have to continue to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. It is interesting because like from my end, like I end up like trying to connect with people myself, like just seeing if people have used this software, that software. But it is a good idea to go through the vendor because I think some vendors do have that ability to do that. Like for example, for Blue Site, right? You guys have the ability. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Like the worst case is like, they say they don't have the resources, but it is a good idea. I think like it's good that people hear that and they try to do that. Because I could tell you that I didn't think about that until like, one day I couldn't find anybody that's using whatever product that I'm trying to connect with. Then I went to the vendor and I'm like, oh, okay, the vendor does have these connections that they can connect us to. So yeah, so thanks for saying that. Thanks for reiterating that actually. But yeah, is there like any kind of like advice you want to give people if they wanted to like get into the field of being like maybe in your specific role, like a director of clinical strategy, or just a general idea of like transitioning from a typical traditional pharmacy space into like that vendor and healthcare IT type company?
Yeah, I would say use your network. I mean, LinkedIn is a very powerful networking tool. Also, organizations like ASHP, or if you're in the diversion space, IHFDA or NATI, or if you're interested in RFID, there's the Unit Vis ID organization. Get involved and connect with people. Not every connection is going to be a warm lead for a job or a job offer, but having more of those conversations with people. And if something comes up, they can say, I spoke with Tony the other day. He might be a good fit for this company. And then maybe something will come up later on, or they might know somebody else to connect you to. So I think that the days of just blind applying to jobs and expecting to get an interview are gone. And I know, Tony, if you want to agree or disagree with me on that statement, but I think using your network and having that warm lead to an HR screen or to somebody that works in the company that might be able to put in a referral can get you pretty far, especially for these jobs that you might have 200-300 applicants applying for.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's pretty difficult nowadays because there is a big screening process on the HR side for job applications. I do want to add though that, when you use your network to like connect with people, it's not just like forming these superficial connections, but it should be meaningful, and it should be to the point where, you don't just like connect just to take. You want to contribute and give back as well to show your value. And I think like that's pretty important as well. Yeah, it's just that there's just so many applications nowadays for these kind of roles. And, the HR filters are, if you don't meet those requirements, they're going to ignore your application. But if you have that warm lead, then there may be a manual override. Like if someone is aware of that application, they can pull it from HR. Sometimes that happens. But it's very important to like be connected through a network.
Yeah, I love what you said, that it needs to be a mutually beneficial relationship. So if you're going to connect with somebody, make sure there's a reason, and you go into it with a reason, and if there's any follow-up as well. And if there's something that you can do to help the person on the other side, that's always, ideal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, for an example, for me, like, not that I applied and went through that way, but I've been on the other side of like when someone was applying to an organization that I work for, and then my director would ask me if I knew anyone, and I knew they were applying. So yes, there are skills that you need to have to do the job, but then it also helps if like somebody. But yeah, going off on that a little bit, talking about skills, like I guess like what are some of the skills you think would be very beneficial and strong to have in a person that would be taking on the role of like what you are doing?
Yeah, I think definitely understanding systems in your hospital is very beneficial. So I've had, pharmacy students specifically ask me, like, how do I get into an informatics role? I do think like understanding the lay of the land of your hospital system can be very helpful. So for example, if you're going to be building critical care order set, but you have never set foot in an ICU, it's being able to take some of your evidence-based medicine, mix with that technology. I think also going into a role like mine is, it always helps if you've used the software first, then applying it to a company that you've never even heard of their software, but you might meet some of the requirements. And then also having skills such as implementation skills, project management skills, being able to benchmark or have key performance indicators on different things that you're doing. A lot of those skills that you might be using in other meetings are very transferable, that if, you've led a med safety committee and you've taken minutes and you've done follow through, that can definitely help you manage a project if that's something that you're interested in an informatics role. So thinking about the skills that you have as a pharmacist, as a clinician, as a leader, and then seeing how those skills can be transferred into the job that you're applying for.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And, if people wanted to ask for, more advice directly from you or had more questions about your particular career path, what's the best way they can reach you?
Yeah, you're welcome to add me on LinkedIn. You can also email me at my Blue Site address. Always happy to take a networking call. And that's jennifer.splawski@bluesite.com.
Awesome. So I'll be putting that into the show notes for everyone. But to be respectful of your time, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and, just sharing your journey, sharing about your career path and, all the advice that you gave.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pharmacy IT and Me podcast. If you did, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. It really helps us reach more people who might be interested in learning more about pharmacy, informatics, and technology. If you would like to suggest a topic or somebody to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I can be best reached on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, technology is a tool, patient care is the goal.